through, but I'll give you 3 tips that you can use and adapt straight away. And I call it my 3 A's. 3 A's. So the first one is assessment. So if you're a manager, do a 360-degree assessment of what your organization is. Who is there? What positions are they in? What type of service do you provide? Do that quick assessment so that you understand your business really well, but also your people. The next thing you need to do is an announcement. So 3 A's, you have the assessment and then you announce. Let your people know, and some organizations have got different departments, and you have supervisors in different departments or team leaders, whatever you call it. Let them know as an organization, you want to be an inclusive organization. And that is what the announcement is. Because you can have all these ideas, if you don't let your people know, then how can you get the buy-in to help you achieve that? So that is announcement. And then the third of that 3 A's is action. So you can't do the assessment and announce it if you don't put them into action. And that's where the action comes in. And so having a roadmap to get you from point B to point A, and that will help you to inject some inclusivity straight away.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host. And in the studio today, all the way from Sydney, Australia, our guest this week is a global expert on workplace inclusivity or workplace inclusion. And she's in the person of Gloria Tabi. Gloria, welcome to Against All Odds.
It's great to be here. Yeah, you were right, all the way from Australia. What a great place to be. Thanks for
21 hours of flying.
Yes, I think I missed a day in between from Australia because I left on the 17th, and then when I got here was the 18th.
Right. Anyway, welcome to England and welcome to Against All Odds. And thank you very much for coming all the way. And to kick us off, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So the way I introduce myself is that I'm Gloria Tabi, and it's really lovely to be here in England with Daniel. I really thank you for inviting me. You know, when you meet someone on online place like LinkedIn, where a lot of my work is, and you don't know the person, but then sometimes there's a connection and you don't know what it is. And I think that's what's happened with Daniel and I. We didn't know each other before till then. And then we found out we both come from Ghana, which is really nice. And so the way I introduce myself is that my family consists of colonized Black African ancestry. My husband is white. My children are mixed. And so that's how I present into the world. Just a few years ago, something happened at work that was shocking. It really, I guess, damaged my very sense of self. And I wanted to understand why Black people are treated so differently in the world. And so, apart from being a mom of 4 children, from 31 to 18, I am a researcher, and I went back to university to understand the specificities of what racism is. Not just the racism that we see on the street that happens to us, but understanding why it's persistent and the insidious nature of it. So that's something that I do. And from then on, I create and support leaders to, I guess, cultivate a culture of inclusion to help people that are not white in their workplaces. And so that's what I do.
That's what you do. Fantastic. So, Gloria, what was it like growing up in Ghana, and what were some of the cultural surprises that you had when you moved to Australia?
Oh, wow.
Before this episode starts, I'd like to ask a big favor. Your subscription means a lot to us, because the bigger this platform gets, the bigger the guests get. So do me a favor, please click on the subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get back to this episode.
Growing up in Ghana is definitely different to Australia. Ghana is, I guess, a colonized country, as most of you will know that will be listening to this podcast. We gained our independence from the British. They didn't just leave Ghana, we had to kick them out. And we gained our independence in 1957. And so that's the kind of country Ghana is. And my parents lived through the habitation of the British, same as a lot of my uncles and my aunties. Ghana is a country that some people might not know much about, but our people were taken. So slave trade were taken to America, Europe, and different parts of the world. So when the British came into Ghana, they didn't just take our resources like the gold and things like that. They also took our people. And so when you think about, say, I'm staying in a little place here in England called Watford, I think it is.
Yeah, Watford, yeah.
Watford. Yeah. And so just think about all the able men and women, someone coming into that country and taking them away. Our culture is an oral tradition. And so when they took them away, they take away our culture as well. And so it couldn't be passed down to people down the generation. And so I guess I wanted to paint a picture to you what Ghana is, the country that I grew up in. We were really poor. As a child, though, I never felt unloved. I was deeply loved by my parents. So I knew my sense of self. And I often say to my children who are born in Australia that it would have been really difficult for me to have grown up in Australia because of the way Black people are treated generally around the world. But Ghana, we didn't have that issue. We had other problems, but we knew our family. We knew our next door neighbors. We knew people across the road. And I was deeply loved, not just by my parents, but people that you meet on the street, and that creates a sense of wealth that money can't buy. And yes, we were poor in terms of materially, but we weren't poor by spiritually, or love was very strong. Now I talk about being poor, and don't mistaken it by being poor means that perhaps we were lazy and we didn't work hard. I'll tell you what, that is not quite true. My parents and a lot of Black people worked. In fact, I didn't understand what a holiday is until I went to Australia. My parents didn't have a holiday. Neither did my grandparents. They just worked from sunrise to dawn. But I didn't understand that the work that they did. So my grandparents, for example, were cocoa farmers. I didn't realize that the cocoa farm that they spent all their life cultivating, they were paid pittance by the colonizers. Even though they have left the country, they were still ruling our country. We call it neo-colonialism. And so they work for the colonizer, even though they weren't physically in Ghana. And so my parents were poor, because of what this thing the impact that it continued to have in our lives. And so by the time I was in grade 1, both sets of my grandparents were passed away. And that is really shocking, because living in Australia and my husband being white, growing up, he had not just his parents, he had his grandparents, but he also had his great grandparents. Now, you will find it very hard to meet an African person that will have both sets of their parents still alive, but not only that, their grandparents or their great grandparents. Now, I'm saying all these things because when we talk about racism, often we just think it's what happens to us on the street. But what I'm trying to tell you is, when you are enslaved, okay, even in your own country, they're having to work and get paid almost bagger all, because the cocoa that my grandparents were cultivating, they didn't get paid very much. So even though they worked till they die on the farm, it's still, they didn't have inheritance through that. But the work they did on the farm killed them in the end. And this is the struggle.
That's quite interesting. But would you also not say that part of the process to prosperity could have been maybe because obviously they're growing the cocoa beans, but obviously the cocoa beans processed has a higher market price, out there, and that's probably why, we won't get into the economics of it,
yes.
Because it's a bigger conversation, but
it's interesting how we can't process it in Ghana, that it has to be shipped to somewhere like Europe to make this chocolate that is very lucrative. But then the people that actually cultivate the plant get almost next to nothing.
I know.
So that's interesting for us to think about. Couldn't we then ask our government to have the cocoa beans processed there, so we make the best chocolate that the world buys from Ghana, so then the money comes back into that economy. So these are bigger questions we need to think about. But these are also ways in which racism can cripple a country. Even though you work hard and all your sometimes we think that wealth is money, but actually wealth is not. When you understand the structure of, say, white family, you realize that wealth is actually your people. Having healthy parents, having healthy grandparents that your kids can have access to, and your grandkids. When they're gone, a whole history is gone with them. And so that's a lot of reframing we need to do.
So, Gloria, what about the fact that, and we're looking at facts here, because whilst there's a lot of, there's a lot of talk about colonialism and all that, it also has to be said that the people who were sold or brought by, some of the people, the black people, sold their own, family, and the people were caught and headed and whatever it is. Would you also not say that there's also a part that we as a people of color also need to
take responsibility
for?
That's a very good point. And it's up to you if you leave this part of the conversation in the podcast, but when it's almost uncomparable, the nature of slave trade that took place in terms of people selling their own people amongst the black communities, as opposed to being sold overseas but being beaten to work till you die, that kind of thing. Those kind of treatment is what has demonized our people. And so to this day, Black people don't think of each other as animals or not having dignity. But other people think of Black people of not, and other people don't have dignity for us. And so when I say it's uncomparable, that's how we've been misconstructed in the world. And so, we were having conversation about there's even a hierarchy amongst Asians and Black people. And Black people are always at the bottom because we are the only human race in the world that was sold and then used for the purposes of our masters. There's no other human race in the world. And so that dehumanization is because of that. And, it's not about not taking responsibility. That is a very pessimistic view. We just need to be able to talk about the issues because you can't solve a problem that you can't talk about it. And that's our problem because we feel unease about this topic, but the uneasiness cannot go away until we fully embrace and talk about it. I'll give you another example. We can move to other questions. Look at gender as a structure. So race and gender are both structures of society. Over the years, we have, as human, we've invested in understanding gender and gender roles, men and women, responsibilities, women in the workplace. Having invested in understanding that construct, gender, we've been able to put mechanisms in our society to help us how we deal with women, how women rise up into very high senior roles, in AXX 100 and so forth. When it comes to race, which is exactly the same social construct as gender, we are unwilling to talk about it and dissect the way in which race has been constructed and how it came to then infiltrate the world. We cut it short before we actually understand it. And so our failure to do that is why racism continues to happen to this day. And if we don't talk about this, it will continue to happen. It will happen to our kids. It will happen to our kids' children and their children's children. It will continue until we put that nice feelings that we feel when we talk about race and face it head on, just like we've done with gender. So I wanted to just give you that comparison, and that's the problem that we face. We don't talk enough about race.
Right, so just following on from there, because it's one thing talking about race. It's another thing actually also dealing with the mental side of racism, because when you sort of think that you have to work twice as hard, to be half as good, it's almost demoralizing.
It is.
It gets to a point that you ask yourself, is it even worth it? But having said that, we also know of a few people who have somehow managed to meander their way through to places of significance, on a global stage, despite the color of their skin, So my question is, how can somebody who's watching this, who is, has not yet broken through, how can they basically, and it comes to your book as well, of fostering inclusivity in the workplace, how can people go about living their lives in a way where race becomes less of an issue to their progress, in whatever chosen field or career they might have?
It's a great question, Daniel. Thanks for that. Race will always be there. Even if we rise to the corporate ladder, wherever that imaginative, success is, race is always there. But it's how people rise above it is the question. I always say to even my younger self or any person that will watch this podcast later on is that be really aware of who you are, your roots, and understanding that as a person as a whole, being proactively reflective of yourself is really, really important, because when you are unafraid to be who you are, despite your environment, despite whatever you're going through, it's actually a power. And that helps us to be whatever we want to be regardless. And so firstly, work on yourself. When you invest in self-development, it's powerful, because learning is yours to keep. Nobody can take your learning away. And so work on yourself, and that gives you power. You can command a room wherever you are, whichever role you are, and do it well. And so whatever your position is in the organization, do it to your best of your ability. And people will see that. Find ways, smart way, not just working hard, but smarter ways. So whatever your skill is, find a way that in that area, when people think about, say, racism in a society or in the workplace, I want people to think about me. So whatever I have to do in learning about that topic, but also being kind to share it as well. I mean, I'm actually going somewhere else, not in UK, but I'm sitting right here in Daniel's studio talking to you. I'm not getting paid to be here, but I wanted to be here, and I accepted the invitation. So when you know that topic of yours, whatever it might be willing to also share it, and being kind and generous. It is also really powerful of working your way through. And people see that when you give. And so learn to give more than you take helps. And take people along as you're going, because our people have had it tough. And so if you are a person in leadership, then look back behind you and take some people along. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, that's actually quite helpful, because one of the things I've realized is that not everybody takes people along with them. For some people, it's about them being at the top or having managed to figure it out, and they take nobody with them. And then with others, they're quite intentional and conscious about taking people with them. Right. So in terms of fostering inclusive teams and workplaces, how can somebody who's watching this program, who's maybe a middle level manager or whatever it is, what benefits would accrue to their team or to the organization if they have a mindset of inclusivity and seeing what everybody can bring to the table, instead of structuring their teams in such a way as on racial lines, which is like, you can only do this or you can do that. I mean, if you look in many organizations these days, I'll give you a practical example. It's very easy to find people of color who work in IT, right? Or as security people, or, at a certain level. But beyond that, it's very, very hard to find people of color. Okay. How can an organization begin to change its outputs, by maybe changing its thinking and giving people an opportunity to shine if they have the capacity to shine.
Yeah, it's the basis of my work. So it's a great question, and it's interesting being here in London. Yesterday I had the opportunity to go around and look at some shops, and almost every shop I went to, the security guard is either a black person or a person of color. So this question you've asked me is so true. It couldn't be truer. There are more view and positions at the lower end in society, and that has to change. In a 21st century leadership, leaders need to be inclusive, or they actually lose. There's a lot of research to back this. And so for me, it's about seeing a need and wanting to do something about it. The world is changing. There's more diverse people entering our workplaces than is ever been before. We have women entering the workforce who they didn't. Several decades ago, women weren't prominently in the workplaces or positions of power. People of color are of all different races are entering the workforce. People with disability, gender diverse. So if you're a leader and you're watching this podcast, it's your ability, the speed of you understanding how to cultivate a culture of inclusion is your asset. It's going to make you competitive than your competitor. Your ability to bring people together, not just recruiting people of color and putting them in positions of power on the ladder. It's about how are you going to cultivate a culture that allows them to stay once you've recruited them, because a lot of people of color are not staying. They go in, the culture is toxic, and next minute they are out. So turnover can be quite costly. So your ability to actually learn how to work with different people is going to be an asset. Research shows that organizations that are more inclusive are twice or even more profitable than organizations that are not. They are also about 5 times going to have their staff members stay. So staff retention. They are also more innovative. So because you have more ideas coming to the table. And so the research is there, the benefit is there, is actually finding ways to do that. And there's plenty of resources. I mean, Daniel's holding one of my books where I really talk about how to understand the issues that people that looks like me or Daniel faces in the corporate environment, and how to help those people so that you can retain them.
Okay.
There's also another part to your question as to where to start. And I always, obviously this is a long process to go through, but I'll give you 3 tips that you can use and adapt straight away. And I call it my 3 A's. 3 A's. So the first one is assessment. So if you're a manager, do a 360-degree assessment of what your organization is. Who is there? What positions are they in? What type of service do you provide? Do that quick assessment so that you understand your business really well, but also your people. The next thing you need to do is an announcement. So 3 I's, you have the assessment and then you announce. Let your people know, and some organizations have got different department. And you have supervisors in different department or team leaders, whatever you call it. Let them know as an organization, you want to be an inclusive organization. And that is what the announcement is. Because you can have all these ideas, if you don't let your people know then how can you get the buy-in to help you achieve that? So that is announcement. And then the third on of that 3A's is action. So you can't do the assessment and announce it if you don't put them into action. And that's where the action comes in. And so having a roadmap to get you from point B to point A, and that will help you to inject some inclusivity straight away.
Yeah, so following up from that question, what I've seen in my sort of lived experience is that the intention might be there, the assessment might be there, because it seems to be, well, at least a few years ago, post George Floyd, it seemed to be the thing to be seen doing.
Yes, the black squares.
Yeah. So there was this massive push for DEI and B, and every company was like, was trying to get on the ladder and trying to be projecting this image of inclusivity. But how much of that really was just ticking a box, and how much of that really was, a cultural change, a systemic cultural change, which comes from the top. Because if you look in many organizations still, the corporate structure does not reflect inclusivity.
No.
There's a lot of talk.
Yes, you're right. And so that's why my 3A's, there's the action in there. So you can do all those things. If you don't act on it, it's not going to happen. And you're so right. There's a lot of companies that are doing performative talk rather than actually making that culture change. My process and what I do is that anti-racism is fully embedded in my diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. You can't really have a culture of inclusion if you don't deal with racism. And that might come as a shock or difficult for a lot of leaders, but that's what I do. And so I choose who I work with. I want organizations that will come with me on the journey and deal with the question of race. And so as you saw me at the start of this video, I refer back a lot of the topic of race. Like I share with you about gender. I want race to be talked about, just like we talk about gender. It shouldn't be an uncomfortable talk. And we can't deal with a situation that we can't talk about. And so for me, DEI without anti-racism is nothing at all, because you cannot achieve an inclusion when in Australia, for example, almost half of us are born overseas. We are not all white people. And so if we are not doing anti-racism, then we are not actually including a whole cross-section of people in our organizations. You see? And so racism is real. It affects Black people. It affects people of color. It affects indigenous people. And so if you're a leader and you want to achieve, you want inclusion, I would say start with anti-racism. There's no shortcut. There's no other way, but anti-racism will get you faster. Another reason why anti-racism will get you faster is that race, with all the structures of society of differences, race is the strongest category of differences. So we have gender. I'll briefly talk about gender, but there's also disability, there's sexuality, there's ageism. All those differences in society, race is the strongest category of difference. So if you're going to want inclusion and you don't deal with racism, then you're not going to achieve inclusion. But if you do deal with racism first, you have the capacity to resolve other problems of differences, because race is a stronger category. You can't do it the other way around. You can't do gender and help people of color or Black people. But you can do anti-racism and help women in gender issues, because race is a stronger category of difference. So That's what we need to, how we need to start it. I'm happy to go in my framework with anyone, but you need to embed anti-racism in your approaches to be able to cultivate a culture of inclusion. That is imperative.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Gloria. So, for somebody who's watching this podcast and works in a toxic environment where there are clear traces of racism, but you can't talk about it for fear of being victimized, for fear of being seen as a troublemaker, which comes up.
Yes.
And anybody who dares to bring that up, you do that at your own peril, because oftentimes there are consequences. There are times where people find it difficult to even get other jobs because this label kind of goes with them as a stigma.
Yeah.
Wherever they go, it's like, oh, watch this person. Especially if you're in an industry that is closed and people talk to each other and people know that maybe you accused a manager or a leader and you're foreman.
You become the problem. Yeah.
Yes, it's like, oh, this person has those leanings or those tendencies. How does somebody in that situation deal with that reality? Do you just keep quiet, or do you just vote with your feet and go and find a more inclusive organization to work for? In which case you haven't really solved the problem. You haven't done anything to help.
Chances are the organization you move to, you have the same sort of problems also rearing its neck.
Yeah. So, how does one handle that?
It is a really difficult question, and I wish that I have answers to give you, but I do have thoughts on that, and it's real. It happens to Black people a lot, where you are experiencing racism, but simply by talking about it, you then becomes the problem. And it's unfair. Where does accountability happens? And so it goes back to the stories I was telling you before when I first introduced myself. We need to, I guess, be as a collective and share our stories. And I have used this phrase a few times. You can't solve a problem that you can't talk about. And that's real. If Black people are experiencing racism, but we are, not wanting to talk about it and pushing it aside, it'll only fester. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get dealt with. Just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So just like we talk about gender, I will encourage people to talk about racism without stopping. You might not be able to talk about it at work, but find your fellow Black people and talk about it and swear a lot about it, because racism is really dehumanizing. It is very impactful. And you can't just hold it in. Because do you know what happens? When you hold it in, it comes out somehow, but it comes out toxic to either other Black people or your own family and your children. That's something that I have to learn the hard way. And I made a very conscious decision that racism that happens to me, whether it's a Black person or another person of color, that sort of up high on the ladder, is that I hand back the racism to them. It doesn't belong to my family. It doesn't belong in my body, because when it stays in your body, you're going to get sick. And that get transferred to your spouse or your kids. And your kids don't deserve that. They're already having racism by going to school themselves. So they didn't need your frustration. And so the way that we need to be dealing with it, after studying racism and knowing the insidious nature of it, is harmful and very dehumanizing of our people, is that we support each other. I mean, right here, right now, talking to you is my way of supporting you by, detouring my trip to parts of Europe to be here talking to you. We need to talk to each other about this thing. Guess what? Other cultures do it. Indians do it. They band together. Asians do it. We need to do it. And that's how we're going to build trust with each other. Oh gosh, this is actually making me a bit teary because we don't trust each other. We don't trust other Black people. But we share one thing, which is racism that happens to her. It happened to all of us. So at least we can form some friendship and talk about these things. We need to talk about it to get it out of our system. Otherwise, it's toxin, and the toxin will affect our relationship and it makes us sick. So that's what I would do, is that you might not be perhaps able to talk about it to your supervisor for being a problem, but find other Black people. I want a lot of Black people finding each other and having communities and talking about this problem. And sometimes you find solutions by talking about it. Someone must gone through the same issue and they might be able to share with you how they dealt with it. Okay, so that I know is not a straightforward answer, but that's how I'll go about dealing with it. But whatever it is, please don't keep it in. Talk about it.
So yeah, thanks a lot for that, Gloria. So are you suggesting that people look for support mechanisms and support networks, either through individuals or people who have had lived experiences in groups?
In groups.
And stuff like
Other
that?
Black people. Form Black. I mean, I spent a day with a friend yesterday and I said to her, I have not seen so many Black Africans in a city like I have in London. It's amazing. It's amazing. The area I live in Blue Mountains in Australia, I would say to you, I'm the only Black person in that whole area. People know me, they can even walk you to my house because they say, Gloria, the Black lady, the African lady. There's not many Black people. You are blessed with so many Black people here in one city. So I will form some kind of friendship. You might not be friends with everyone, but you might have Black men that meet once a week on a Tuesday night that all come from Ghana or something. So you have the language that you can speak, or Black African women who all have, sister locks that meet once every Monday or something. But that's how you are going to collectively empower each other, just like other cultures do it,
Good. As we prepare to wrap up this conversation, what advice would you give to your younger self? Both from a career and a life perspective.
Yeah, that's also good. All your questions are pretty good. My younger self. Wow. So Gloria, and my Ghana name is Abena. And what I would say to that little girl, Abena, growing up in Accra, I was born in a little town called Nkoko. Nkoko is in the eastern part of Ghana. And then my family come from Kwabing, which is also an eastern part of Ghana. Growing up, I was a scared little girl. I wouldn't have envisaged her living abroad, traveling across continent, being in a big city like UK on my own without my family, and navigating the world that I have done, talking about racism, which is kind of the taboo topic I talk about this, just think about corporate Australia. I have conversations about racism. Like, I mean, that's not the girl I remember growing up. Talking about racism with politicians, leaders. What I would say to that girl is to take risk. Risk. Because by taking risk is how we grow. And we can't grow from our comfort zone. We grow outside of our comfort zone. And in saying that, I'm not preaching to you to be perfect either. There's going to be a lot of mistakes along the way. But that's how you grow. You make mistakes and you learn from it. But remember, you won't start from the bottom because you've already made mistakes. You'll be starting from a different space. And you can pivot from there. And so, yes, taking risk, not being afraid, and also in your leadership, and I have said it before, kindness and generosity is really, really, really important. What you give out comes back. I've been so blessed just by blessing other people and being kind, because vulnerability is part of being human. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I don't have a perfect hair, but it is a hair that grows on my head. You know, we need to be a little bit not so strict about ourselves, about perfection, because it's illusion. It's by being kind, being true to yourself. Laugh a lot, make mistakes, and bring people along.
Fantastic. We have a tradition on this podcast where we give our guests the opportunity to dedicate the episodes that they feature on to anyone or any group of people of their choice. So who would you like to dedicate today's episode to? And you can look at the camera for that.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I just really want to thank Daniel and this podcast that he's doing. You know, some of the work that we do are not compensatable. It's a lot of time. And so I thank you for you and your team for spending so much time creating these videos to really help our community in seeing how we can pivot and grow against the odds. And I think that's a beautiful thing that you're doing, and I really appreciate and thank you for that. So who I will dedicate this video to will be young people. Any young person out there, I dedicate this video to you. I hope you can gain something out of it. I have rattled a lot, so I hope there is something there that you can find useful. And don't be afraid and take risk, and reach out to me if I can support your work in any way as well. You find me on LinkedIn, Gloria Tabi.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much, Gloria. And where can people get your book as well?
Oh, definitely on my website. Okay. It's best you buy from me on my website than Amazon, because all the money doesn't come to me. So get onto my website, www.everydayinclusion.com.au, or contact me on LinkedIn and I can help you with that.
Fantastic. If you've enjoyed today's episode, I'd like to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I shall see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.